Welcome to Dreamy Mystery. Here's the thing that blows my mind about the map on your wall, the one depicting the world as we know it. It's a story. Every line, every colour, every named territory is a narrative, painstakingly constructed over centuries. But what if a massive sprawling chapter of that story, one that covered a significant portion of the entire globe, was simply torn out? What if a vast civilization, an empire so grand it dominated the very centre of the supercontinent, simply vanished from our collective memory, leaving behind only whispers on antique maps and architectural anomalies in plain sight? Think about that for a second. We're not talking about a lost city in the Amazon or a forgotten kingdom in the desert. We're talking about an entity, often labelled quote Jandulwan or quote Biendul-Landorn, that for centuries cartographers depicted as stretching from the Caspian Sea all the way to the Pacific Ocean, north of Tibet and China, encompassing what we now call Siberia and Central Asia. On many 18th and 19th century maps, this isn't just a blank, unexplored space. It's often delineated with borders, dotted with cities, crisscrossed by rivers, and even subdivided into quote 2, quote 3, and quote 4. These aren't vague, speculative territories. They are often rendered with the same cartographic authority as France or the Ottoman Empire. Yet, open any modern history textbook, and Tartary, as a distinct, powerful entity, is simply absent. It's a void, replaced by a patchwork of nascent Russian expansion, various nomadic tribes, and the northern reaches of Chinese influence. This is where it gets genuinely interesting. How does a territory so vast, so consistently represented on historical documents, become a ghost in our historical narrative? This isn't just a geographical curiosity. It's a fundamental contradiction that, for some, hints at a historical cover-up of unprecedented scale. If you're enjoying this journey through history, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And I'm always curious. Drop a comment letting me know what city and time zone you're watching from. There's something special about knowing this story is reaching people all over the world. Let's start with the obvious question nobody asks. What exactly was Tartary? For those who champion the idea of a lost global civilization, Tartaria wasn't merely a geographical region inhabited by various Turkic and Mongol peoples, as mainstream history suggests. No. They argue it was a unified, highly advanced and technologically sophisticated empire that spanned continents, possessing a distinct culture and a unique architectural style. This civilization, they claim, thrived for centuries, possibly millennia, before its systematic erasure from the historical record, largely in the 19th century. The proponents of Tartaria point to a supposed global catastrophe, often referred to as the Mud Flood, which they believe buried the lower levels of countless buildings worldwide, wiping out much of this advanced civilization's infrastructure and knowledge, paving the way for a manufactured history. The traditional historical view, of course, is far less dramatic. Historians explain that Quote 7 was a generic, somewhat pejorative term used by Europeans, particularly from the Middle Ages onward, to refer to the vast, largely unexplored lands of Central and Northern Asia, inhabited by the Tatars, Mongols, and other nomadic groups. It was a region, yes, but never a single cohesive empire called Quote 8. The subdivisions like Quote 9 simply indicated areas under Russian influence, and Quote 10 those under Qing dynasty control. These were not administrative divisions of a unified Tartarian state, but rather external European classifications of influence. The name itself is thought to derive from Masgast, quote 11, combined with, quote 12 down, the mythological underworld, reflecting European fears and prejudices about the Mongol invasions. But then, why the consistent, almost authoritative depiction of cities and detailed geography on those old maps, often with features that don't quite align with the known history of scattered nomadic tribes? This is where the plot thickens, not just with maps, but with bricks and mortar. Proponents of Tartaria often point to a global architectural phenomenon. They highlight an abundance of grand, ornate buildings found in cities across the world, from St. Petersburg to New York, from San Francisco to Mumbai, that share striking similarities in style. We're talking about massive structures built in a neoclassical, Beaux-Arts or Renaissance revival style, often featuring intricate carvings, colossal columns, and domed roofs. Think about the old federal buildings in Washington, D.C., the grand railway stations in Europe, or the state capitol buildings across America. These structures, often attributed to the late 19th or early 20th century, seem to emerge fully formed, with a level of sophistication and scale that some find difficult to reconcile with the supposed technological capabilities of the era, especially after a devastating American Civil War or ongoing European conflicts. And then there's the mud flood theory. Look closely at many of these grand old buildings. Do you notice anything peculiar about their ground floors? Often the windows appear to be half buried, or the main entrance seems to descend into the earth, requiring steps to go down to street level. In some cases, what appears to be a basement window is actually the top half of a much larger window, suggesting that the original ground level was significantly lower. The theory posits that a global cataclysm, a massive flood of mud or liquefied earth, engulfed the lower stories of these structures, effectively burying entire sections of a previous civilization. The official explanation often involves simply settling ground, changes in street level over centuries, or a design choice. But the sheer global prevalence of this partially buried aesthetic from Paris to Philadelphia fuels the Tartarian narrative of a hidden past. Adding another layer to this architectural enigma are the star forts. These geometrically precise star-shaped fortifications are found on every continent, often in strategic coastal locations or river junctions. Their intricate, multi-pointed designs, optimized for defensive cannon fire, appear almost simultaneously across the globe from the 16th to 19th centuries, often without clear documented records of their construction, or with official histories that seem to downplay the immense engineering feat involved. Who built them, and how did such a complex uniform design spread so rapidly and effectively across the world, seemingly independent of known colonial powers or indigenous technologies? Mainstream history attributes their widespread adoption to the Trace Italian style, developed in Renaissance Italy, disseminated through military engineers. But for Tartarian theorists, their ubiquity and often mysterious origins suggest a global, unified defense network built by an advanced civilization. The idea, then, is that these architectural marvels, the grand buildings, the buried lower floors, the star forts, are not disparate creations of various cultures. Instead, they are the surviving remnants of a single global Tartarian civilization. The cover-up, according to this theory, involved not only the deliberate alteration of maps and history books, but also the repurposing, rebuilding, and often the destruction of these structures to fit a new, manufactured historical narrative. The 19th century, with its rapid industrialization, burgeoning nationalism, and new capabilities for global communication and control, would have been the perfect crucible for such a monumental deception. A new world order built upon the ashes and buried foundations of a forgotten empire. But how could such a vast undertaking be kept secret? And what was the true nature of this supposed global empire beyond its architectural echoes? We've only just begun to scratch the surface of this fascinating historical puzzle. In our next chapter, we'll delve deeper into the cartographic evidence, examining those old maps with a critical eye and exploring how and why Tartary slowly began to disappear from the world's atlases, becoming a phantom limb in the body of global geography. Okay, so we've peeked behind the curtain at the physical world, haven't we? We've considered the grand, ornate buildings, the buried first floors, the star forts, all these tangible remnants that proponents of the Tartarian theory point to as evidence of a lost global civilization, wiped clean by a catastrophic mud flood and then systematically repurposed or destroyed. It's a lot to take in, I know. It fundamentally challenges our understanding of history, architecture, and even geology. But what if the physical evidence, as compelling as it might be, is only half the story? What if there's another layer to this historical onion, one that's even more direct, more undeniable, yet just as thoroughly scrubbed from our collective consciousness? I'm talking about maps, my friends. Old world maps, the very blueprints of our understanding of the planet. Here's where the plot thickens, and for many, this is where the Tartaria theory really sinks its hooks in. Because if you can erase an empire from the physical landscape, you have to erase it from the documented landscape too, right? And what better way to do that than by literally redrawing the world? Imagine holding an atlas from the late 18th or early 19th century. Not a digital recreation, but a heavy, leather-bound tome, its pages brittle with age, the smell of old paper filling your nostrils. You carefully turn the pages, past Europe, past Africa, and then you land on Asia. And there it is, staring back at you, bold and undeniable. Tartary. Not just a vague geographical region, mind you. We're talking about a massive, sprawling landmass dominating the entire northern and central expanse of Asia, stretching from the Caspian Sea all the way to the Pacific Ocean. It's delineated with borders, dotted with cities, crisscrossed with rivers, and often broken down into distinct regions. Quote, 18. Quote, 19. Quote, 20. You'll find it on maps by reputable cartographers like D'Anville, on plates from the Encyclopaedia Britannica, in atlases published by the likes of Emmanuel Bowen and Thomas Kitchin. These weren't obscure fringe publications. These were the definitive geographical records of their time. Think about that for a second. For centuries, across multiple European nations, cartographers consistently depicted this colossal entity. They weren't just drawing a blank space and labelling it unknown. They were mapping a named territory, often with intricate details that suggest a significant organised presence. Why would they go to such lengths if it was merely a generic term for barbarian nomads, as mainstream history often suggests? Were all these esteemed cartographers simply perpetuating a collective error, century after century, Or were they perhaps accurately reflecting the geopolitical reality of their day? Proponents of Tartaria argue that these maps are the smoking gun. They show a unified, or at least a highly significant political and cultural entity that existed for hundreds of years. The sheer scale and consistent depiction of Tartary on these historical maps, they claim, utterly refutes the idea that it was just a nebulous term for various unrelated tribes. It was a place, a country, maybe even an empire. Now here's the kicker. Fast forward a few decades. You pick up an atlas from, say, the 1870s or 1880s. You turn to Asia, and guess what? Tartary is gone, vanished, poof. It's not just renamed in one or two places, it's systematically erased from virtually every new map and atlas published after the mid-19th century. The vast territory that was once Tartary has now been neatly carved up and absorbed by its neighbours. The Russian Empire expands its borders dramatically eastward, claiming huge swathes of what was once Great Tartary. China extends its influence into Chinese Tartary. Other regions are relabeled as Turkestan or Mongolia, often with new, less defined borders than their Tartarian predecessors. This isn't a gradual fade-out. This is an abrupt, almost surgical removal. It's like someone took an eraser to the continent and then redrew the lines to fit a new narrative. The question that immediately leaps out is, how can such a monumental geographical entity simply disappear from the world's maps in the space of a few decades? What happened to it? Mainstream historians offer a straightforward explanation. They say that Dakias, quote 27, was indeed a generalized European term, mostly used for the lands inhabited by various Turco-Mongol peoples. As the Russian and Chinese empires expanded and solidified their control over these regions in the 18th and 19th centuries, the term, quote 28, simply became obsolete. Maps, they argue, were merely updated to reflect these changing political realities and more precise geographical knowledge. It's a logical, unexciting explanation. But for those who delve into the Tartaria theory, this explanation feels inadequate, too convenient. They ask, if it was just a generic term, why the consistent, detailed mapping for so long? Why the defined borders and cities? And why the sudden, almost synchronized disappearance across all major cartographic works? Are we really to believe that every mapmaker, across different nations and publishing houses, just simultaneously decided to update their terminology in the exact same way, at the exact same time, without any acknowledgement of the prior depiction? This is where the cartographic evidence ties directly back to the mud flood theory we discussed. Proponents suggest that the mid-19th century wasn't just a period of geopolitical shifts, it was a period of global catastrophe and subsequent historical reset. The supposed mud flood buried the lower levels of buildings worldwide, creating a blank slate for a new architectural and urban landscape. Simultaneously, they argue, a coordinated effort was undertaken to create a new historical narrative, and a crucial part of that narrative involved erasing the memory of the previous global civilization, Tartaria. If you control the maps, you control the perception of history and geography. If you can make an entire empire vanish from the official records, you can rewrite its past, its achievements, and its very existence. It's a powerful tool for historical revisionism. Think about the implications. We're taught that history is a progression, a linear unfolding of events. But what if, at some point, a major historical reset occurred, and a powerful global civilization was deliberately expunged from the record. The sudden disappearance of Tartary from maps around the same time, many of these grand ancient buildings were supposedly built or rebuilt after a global catastrophe. It's a synchronicity that Tartarian proponents find impossible to ignore. They see it as evidence of a meticulously planned cover-up, a grand deception designed to hide the truth of our past. Who would have the power to orchestrate such a global cartographic change? This isn't just about one cartographer making an individual choice. This would require a level of centralized control and agreement among national academies, geographical societies, and major publishing houses across the Western world. Is it really so far-fetched to imagine powerful institutions working in concert to shape historical narratives, especially if those narratives served a particular agenda? History is, after all, written by the victors. But what if the quote 32s here were those who sought to establish a new order, free from the inconvenient truths of a prior, more advanced global civilization? The more you look at these old maps, the more unsettling the questions become. You see names like, quote, 33, or, quote, 34, suggesting not just a political entity, but a geographical identity intertwined with the very fabric of the planet. And then, to see it all wiped clean, replaced by familiar names and borders that we now take for granted, it truly blows my mind. It makes you wonder what else has been edited, revised, or outright removed from our understanding of the world. This isn't just about a lost empire, it's about the very nature of historical truth. If maps, which we generally consider objective records, can be so profoundly altered, what does that say about the other historical documents we rely on? It encourages us to look at everything with a critical eye, to question the narratives we've been given, and to seek out the anomalies. The cartographic evidence, for many, is the most compelling argument for Tartaria. It's hard to dismiss a geographical entity that was consistently depicted for centuries by the leading mapmakers of the world, only to vanish without a trace in the blink of an eye, historically speaking. It suggests a deliberate act, a conscious decision to erase a significant piece of our global past. So we've touched on the physical remnants and the disappearing maps. But what about the people? What about the culture, the technology, the very essence of this supposed lost civilization? If Tartaria was indeed this advanced, unified global empire, what kind of legacy did it leave behind beyond just buildings and erased lines on a map? What kind of technology did they possess that could have been so dangerous, so inconvenient, that it needed to be systematically hidden from future generations? We're just scratching the surface, and believe me, the rabbit hole goes much, much deeper. So, we've journeyed through the unsettling cartographic disappearing act of Tartary, watching it fade from maps as if it were a phantom limb of history. We've seen the grand, ornate buildings that stand as silent, perplexing monuments across the globe, too similar, too sophisticated for the narratives we've been given. And we've grappled with the showed at 35 theory, suggesting a cataclysmic event that literally buried a forgotten past. But here's where the rabbit hole really starts to deepen, where the whispers of a forgotten empire grow louder, more insistent. If Tartary was a real, unified civilization, as its proponents passionately argue, what exactly was it like? What kind of society built these magnificent structures? And perhaps most chillingly, if it was erased, Who did the erasing, and why? These aren't just idle questions. They're the keys to unlocking a potential truth that could fundamentally shatter our understanding of human history. Let's dive into the fascinating, mind-bending claims about Tartarian civilization itself. Forget what you think you know about 18th and 19th century technology. Tartaria theorists paint a picture not of horse-drawn carriages and rudimentary steam engines, but of a highly advanced, globally interconnected society that had mastered technologies we are only now beginning to rediscover, or perhaps were deliberately prevented from rediscovering. Think about those grand buildings we discussed in the previous chapter, the colossal, often domed structures with intricate spires, copper roofs, and an undeniable aesthetic unity. Whether they're found in San Francisco, St. Petersburg, or Sydney, mainstream history tells us these were the result of individual architectural movements, like Beaux-Arts or Neoclassical, arising independently in different parts of the world. But Tartaria proponents see something far more profound. They argue these weren't just beautiful buildings, they were sophisticated pieces of technology. Imagine a world powered not by fossil fuels, not by the grid we know today, but by something far more ethereal, far more abundant, free energy. This is where the Tartaria theory truly takes a speculative leap, yet one that, for many, elegantly connects the dots of the architectural anomalies. Proponents claim that Tartarians harnessed atmospheric electricity, or perhaps a form of resonant energy, sometimes referred to as ether or etheric energy. Those towering spires and domes, they weren't just decorative, they were antennae, conduits, collectors of this ubiquitous energy. The copper roofs, the specific geometric designs, all part of a grand global energy network. It's a concept that blows my mind, isn't it? The idea that our ancestors, or at least some advanced civilization, had cracked the code of clean, limitless energy. Think of the implications. No need for oil, gas, or coal. No need for the geopolitical struggles that define our modern world. A civilization free from the shackles of resource scarcity, potentially leading to a more harmonious, abundant way of life. This vision of Tartaria is one of peace, advanced knowledge, and a deep understanding of natural laws, living in harmony with the planet rather than exploiting it. This interpretation also sheds new light on the Sen, quote 36 Sen phenomenon. If these buildings were indeed energy generators or distributors, then a cataclysmic event, whether natural or engineered, that buried their lower levels would effectively cripple their power supply. It wouldn't just be a flood, it would be a systematic deactivation of a global infrastructure, and the subsequent repurposing of these structures by the new victors would involve stripping them of their true function, gutting their internal mechanisms, and then presenting them as mere architectural marvels, their original purpose conveniently forgotten or deliberately obscured. So, if Tartaria was this utopian, technologically advanced civilization, what happened to it? How could such a vast, powerful empire simply vanish? This brings us to the who and why of the alleged cover-up, the most insidious and perhaps most unsettling aspect of the Tartaria theory. Proponents suggest a monumental historical reset took place, likely in the mid to late 19th century. This wasn't just a natural decline, it was a deliberate orchestrated campaign by a powerful emerging global elite. Who are these, quote 41, who inherited the earth and rewrote its history? The finger often points to a coalition of rising empires: the British Empire, the nascent United States, the expanding Russian Empire and other European powers, who, after a global conflict or cataclysm, perhaps the very, quote, 42 West event, consolidated their power. Their motive? Control. Pure and simple. Imagine discovering a vast global civilization that offers free energy, promotes peace, and operates outside the paradigms of scarcity and debt. For burgeoning industrial powers and banking cartels, this would be an existential threat. A population with free energy and abundant resources is a population that cannot be easily controlled, taxed, or enslaved by debt. The theory posits that these new powers saw an opportunity to establish a completely different world order, one built on resource scarcity, centralized energy, and a debt-based financial system. To achieve this, they needed to 1. Erase the memory. Remove any trace of Tartaria from history books, maps, and public consciousness. If people don't know an alternative existed, they won't demand it. This explains the cartographic disappearance. It wasn't just geographical updates, but a deliberate scrubbing. 2. Control the technology. Seize and reverse engineer Tartarian technology, or more likely, suppress the free energy aspects and promote less efficient, more controllable forms of energy, like fossil fuels. Any remaining functional Tartarian tech would be rebranded as new inventions by figures within the new power structure. Think about the timing of the Industrial Revolution and the explosion of patents. Was it pure ingenuity or the repurposing of inherited knowledge? 3. Repurpose the infrastructure. The grand Tartarian buildings, too magnificent to simply destroy, were repurposed, attributed to new architects, new eras, new purposes. World's fairs, for example, are often cited as prime examples of this. These grand expositions, with their elaborate, temporary-looking structures, were, according to the theory, often temporary occupations of existing Tartarian buildings, showcased as marvels of new engineering, before being conveniently dismantled or allowed to, quote 45, to prevent scrutiny. 4. Fabricate a new history. Create a narrative of human progress that fits the new agenda, a history of slow, linear advancement from primitive to modern, conveniently omitting any highly advanced predecessors. This would involve rewriting textbooks, destroying libraries, and censoring information on a global scale. Think about how many ancient texts were, quote 46, or quote 47 throughout history. Could this be part of the pattern? This isn't just about a lost empire, it's about a lost potential for humanity. The idea that we were deliberately steered away from a path of abundance and harmony and towards a path of conflict and scarcity is a heavy pill to swallow. It suggests a level of deception so profound, so all-encompassing, that it challenges the very foundations of our perceived reality. Of course, mainstream historians largely dismiss these claims as wild speculation, lacking concrete, verifiable evidence. They point to the absence of Tartarian historical records, the lack of a unified language or government structure, and the reliance on circumstantial architectural similarities and anecdotal interpretations. They argue that, quote 48 Tuscans was simply a fluid generic term for a vast unconquered region of nomadic tribes, and its disappearance from maps reflects improved geographical knowledge and the political consolidation of the Russian and Chinese empires. But for the proponents of Tartaria, these conventional explanations feel inadequate, almost deliberately simplistic. They ask, how do you explain the global consistency of the architecture, the sudden, synchronized cartographic erasure, the partially buried buildings, the uniformity of the Rule and Quote 49, they argue that the very absence of mainstream answers for these anomalies is what gives the Tartaria theory its compelling power. The gaps in our historical narrative are too vast, the coincidences too numerous to ignore. What does it mean for us, then, if this grand narrative of erasure is even partially true? It means we are living in a world built on a foundation of lies, or at least a heavily curated version of the truth. It means the past is not a fixed, immutable thing, but a fluid narrative, subject to the whims and agendas of those in power. And if one such monumental cover-up could happen, what else has been hidden? What other truths have been edited out of our collective memory? This isn't just about dusty old maps or forgotten buildings. It's about the very nature of truth, power, and the human story. It forces us to ask, are we truly free, or are we living within a carefully constructed illusion designed to keep us from realizing our true potential? The implications are staggering, and they compel us to look closer, to question everything, and to seek the hidden threads that might just unravel the greatest historical cover-up ever conceived. What do you think? Is it a fantastical delusion, or a chilling possibility that demands further investigation? The more you look, the more unsettling the answers become. Okay, you've seen the maps, you've glimpsed the architecture, and you've felt that unsettling shiver of possibility. We've touched on the mud flood and the enigmatic star forts. But now, friends, we're about to dive headfirst into the very heart of the Tartarian theory, the why behind this alleged global cover-up. Because if something this monumental was erased, there had to be an equally monumental motive, right? Prepare yourselves, because this is where the plot really thickens, where the pieces start to click into place, and where the implications become truly mind-boggling. This is where we talk about energy, free energy. Think about the grand, ornate buildings we discussed, the ones with the soaring spires, the magnificent copper domes, the intricate finials and obelisks that adorn their peaks. Mainstream history tells us these were purely aesthetic, symbols of wealth and power, architectural flourishes. But what if they were something more? What if they were, in fact, functional components of an advanced energy system? Proponents of the Tartarian theory argue, with compelling conviction, that these structures weren't just pretty faces. They claim these buildings were designed to harness atmospheric electricity, or, quote, 53 yut, a concept that mainstream science largely dismisses, but which was widely explored by brilliant minds like Nikola Tesla. Imagine a world where energy wasn't a commodity, wasn't something you had to dig out of the ground or burn to create. Imagine a world where your cities, your homes, your transportation, your industries, all powered by a ubiquitous, clean and free energy source, simply by tapping into the very atmosphere around us. This isn't some fringe idea pulled from thin air. Look at old photographs of these magnificent cities from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. What do you not see? You rarely see the dense thicket of power lines, the massive electrical grids, the colossal power plants that we associate with modern electrification. Yet these cities were clearly illuminated, bustling with activity, and boasting technological marvels that, by conventional historical accounts, should have required immense power infrastructure. The theory suggests that the spires, domes, and even the materials used in these buildings acted like giant antennae or capacitors, drawing in and distributing this ambient energy. Copper, gold, quartz, materials known for their conductive and piezoelectric properties, were often integrated into these designs. The very design of Tartarian architecture, they argue, was a testament to their understanding of physics and energy, far beyond what we're told our ancestors possessed. They weren't just building beautiful structures, they were building living, breathing energy generators. Now let's connect this free energy concept to the alleged historical reset. Here's where the motive for erasure becomes chillingly clear. If you have a global civilization powered by free, abundant, and accessible energy, what does that mean for control? What does that mean for wealth? It means that the fundamental pillars of our modern economic system, scarcity, ownership of resources, the need for fossil fuels, and the perpetual cycle of debt, simply wouldn't exist. Imagine the power shift. No more dependence on oil barons, no more national grids controlled by corporations, no more energy bills. The very notion of a central authority dictating who gets power and at what cost would crumble. And that, my friends, is a threat to any emerging global elite seeking to consolidate power and establish a new world order based on resource control and financial dominion. Proponents argue that the mid to late 19th century was a pivotal time, as the great empires of Britain, the US, Russia, and others were consolidating their power, and as industrialization began to truly take hold, the existence of a free energy-powered Tartarian civilization would have been a massive impediment to their agenda. Their agenda, they claim, was to establish a new system where energy was a controlled commodity, where industry relied on finite resources, and where populations were dependent on centralized systems. So, how do you achieve this? How do you switch from a free energy paradigm to a fossil fuel and debt paradigm? You don't just replace the technology, you erase the very memory of it. You dismantle the old system, literally and figuratively, and then you fabricate a new history that makes your, quote 55, technologies seem like revolutionary advancements rather than inferior replacements. This brings us to one of the most compelling and often cited pieces of evidence by Tartaria researchers, the World's Fairs. Think about the colossal, breathtaking structures erected for these international exhibitions. The Chicago World's Columbian Exposition of 1893, the St. Louis World's Fair of 1904, the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo in 1901. These were cities built overnight, seemingly out of thin air, with grand neoclassical architecture, elaborate lighting, and fountains that defied the technological capabilities of the time, according to conventional history. The official narrative tells us these were temporary structures, built from plaster, wood, and staff, a mixture of plaster and fibre, designed to awe and inspire, and then torn down shortly after the fairs concluded. But look closely at the photographs. Do these look like temporary facades? The sheer scale, the intricate detail, the apparent solidity of these buildings. Many researchers find it incredibly difficult to believe they were mere ephemeral creations, especially given the rapid construction timelines. Proponents of the Tartarian theory suggest a far more radical explanation. Many of these World's Fair buildings were not built from scratch at all. Instead, they were existing Tartarian structures, perhaps damaged by the mud flood or other cataclysms, that were repurposed, cleaned up, and then presented to the public as brand new, temporary marvels. This served a dual purpose. It allowed the new powers to showcase advanced technology, which was, in reality, inherited Tartarian tech, while simultaneously controlling the narrative around its origins and eventual disappearance. Why tear them down, then? If they were so magnificent, why not keep them? Because the theory goes, they represented a connection to the old world, to the free energy paradigm. Their demolition wasn't just about clearing space, it was about erasing the physical evidence of a superior, suppressed technology and a forgotten civilization. The few structures that were kept, like the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco, which was later rebuilt in concrete, were often stripped of their energy-harnessing components or repurposed for mundane functions. Consider the sheer energy required to light up these fairs, especially at night. The Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, for instance, was famously lit by Nikola Tesla himself, utilizing alternating current technology. This was presented as a groundbreaking achievement. But what if Tesla wasn't inventing the concept of widespread electrical illumination, but rather rediscovering or re-implementing a technology that Tartaria had already perfected? What if the very structures he was illuminating were designed to be energy conduits in the first place? It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Doesn't. The historical reset, then, wasn't just about changing maps. It was about changing the very fabric of human understanding, rewriting the past to control the future. It involved 1. Erasing the historical record. Removing Tartaria from maps, burning books, destroying artifacts, and fabricating new historical narratives. 2. Repurposing infrastructure. Taking existing Tartarian buildings, forts, and energy systems, rebranding them, and either claiming them as new inventions or demolishing them. 3. Introducing a new energy paradigm. Shifting humanity from free, abundant energy to a system based on finite resources, coal, oil, that could be controlled, taxed, and used to create massive wealth and dependency. 4. Creating a Quote 60. History of linear progress, presenting a story where humanity slowly progresses from primitive to modern, making the advanced Tartarian civilization an inconvenient anomaly. This allowed the new elites to present themselves as the bringers of progress, rather than the suppressors of it. This level of coordinated deception seems almost unfathomable, doesn't it? How could such a massive secret be kept? Who would have the power, the resources, and the motive to orchestrate a global historical cover-up of this magnitude? This is where the speculation really takes flight. Proponents point fingers at various powerful entities, the burgeoning global empires of the 19th century, British, American, Russian, powerful banking cartels, secret societies, or a combination thereof. They suggest that these groups, recognizing the immense power and control they could gain by monopolizing energy and reshaping history, systematically began to dismantle the Tartarian system. The just quote 61 theory, which we touched upon earlier, also plays a crucial role here. Was it a natural cataclysm, perhaps a global deluge of mud and sediment, possibly linked to seismic events or a pole shift, that conveniently buried the lower levels of Tartarian cities, obscuring their true age and function? Or was it, as some more radical theories suggest, partially engineered or exploited to help facilitate the reset, burying evidence of the old world and allowing for a quote 62 for the new powers. The fact that so many grand buildings around the world show evidence of buried ground floors is, for many, too much of a coincidence to ignore. Think about the implications of this. If true, it means our entire understanding of human history, technological development, and even the nature of energy itself might be fundamentally flawed. It means that the world we live in, with its reliance on fossil fuels, its energy crises, and its geopolitical struggles over resources, might be the direct result of a deliberate act of suppression, a grand deception designed to benefit a select few. It's a lot to take in, I know. It challenges everything we've been taught. But that's the beauty and the terror of the Tartarian theory. It forces us to question, to look closer, to consider the possibility that the greatest story ever told might also be the greatest lie. So, what do you think? Is it a wild, baseless conspiracy theory? Or does the sheer volume of architectural anomalies, cartographic disappearances, and a compelling motive for suppression hint at something far more profound lurking beneath the surface of our accepted history? The rabbit hole, my friends, goes deeper than you can possibly imagine, and we're just getting started. We've journeyed through the cartographic vanishing act, peered into the buried levels of grand architecture, and contemplated the geometric precision of star forts. But what if all this evidence, these tantalizing breadcrumbs, points to something even more fundamental than just a forgotten empire? What if the true prize, the ultimate reason for Tartaria's alleged erasure, lies not just in its existence, but in its technology? A technology so profound, so paradigm-shifting, that its suppression fundamentally altered the course of human civilization? Think about it. Free, abundant energy. No more oil wars, no more power grids controlled by a select few, no more reliance on fossil fuels that pollute our planet. It's a vision that blows my mind, honestly. And it's this very vision, proponents argue, that posed an existential threat to the emerging global powers of the 19th century. So, let's talk about those magnificent buildings. You've seen the images, the ornate domes, the towering spires capped with copper, the intricate detailing that seems to defy the supposed construction capabilities of the era. Mainstream history tells us these were purely aesthetic, symbols of grandeur, architectural marvels built to display wealth and power. And sure, they're so beautiful. But what if their beauty was merely a byproduct of their primary function? What if these structures were, in essence, giant sophisticated machines? The Tartarian theory posits that these buildings weren't just buildings. They were energy conductors, receivers, and transmitters. Imagine an entire global civilization powered by the very atmosphere around us. Sounds like science fiction, right? But proponents point to historical accounts, suppressed research, and even the work of figures like Nikola Tesla, who, by the way, was experimenting with wireless energy transmission and atmospheric electricity right around the time Tartaria supposedly vanished from the maps. Coincidence? Or a deliberate, albeit failed, attempt to reintroduce a lost technology? Consider the specific elements. Domes. These aren't just pretty hats on buildings. In many Tartarian-aligned structures, domes are often made of specific materials, sometimes incorporating metals. Could they have acted as resonators, amplifying certain frequencies or collecting atmospheric charge? Spires and obelisks. Reaching skyward, often topped with conductive materials like copper or gold. Think about lightning rods, but on a grander, more intentional scale. Could these have been drawing energy directly from the ether, from the sky itself, much like an antenna? The ether, a concept once widely accepted in physics before being discarded, is central to this idea, a medium through which energy could be freely harvested. Copper roofs and ornamentation. We see copper used extensively in many of these old-world buildings, often oxidizing to that distinctive verdigris green. Copper is an excellent conductor. Was this purely for durability or aesthetic appeal, or did it play a role in a larger energetic system, perhaps acting as a massive circuit board integrated into the very fabric of the city? Mainstream explanations for these features typically focus on structural integrity, insulation, or stylistic choices, but when you start to connect the dots, the global prevalence, the striking similarities, the consistent use of certain materials and forms, a different narrative begins to emerge. It's almost as if these architects, wherever they were working from a universal blueprint, a shared understanding of how to harness the environment. They argue that the very cities themselves were designed as massive interconnected energy grids, providing clean, abundant power to every resident. Think about that for a second. A world without power lines, without utility bills, without the struggle for energy resources. It's a game changer, isn't it? This brings us back to the mud flood. If Tartaria was indeed a global, technologically advanced civilization, what could have caused such widespread destruction and burial of its lower levels? Proponents suggest a cataclysmic event, perhaps a natural disaster on an unprecedented scale, or even something more sinister, a deliberate act of war or sabotage designed to cripple this free energy system and clear the way for the new paradigm. Imagine a world suddenly deluged by a massive viscous flood, cities buried up to their second or third stories, infrastructure crippled, populations decimated or displaced. This wasn't just a local event. The evidence, they claim, is global. We're talking about a planet-wide reset. And what happens after such a devastating event? Who cleans up the mess? Who rebuilds? And perhaps most chillingly, who repopulates the vast, now empty or sparsely populated territories? This is where the narrative takes an even darker turn, leading us to one of the more unsettling aspects of the alleged cover-up: the orphan trains and the systematic re-education of survivors. The official history tells us that in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, hundreds of thousands of orphaned, abandoned, or impoverished children in North America and Europe were sent by train to new homes in the burgeoning West. A charitable act, a noble endeavour to provide new opportunities. But what if this wasn't purely about charity? What if these, quote 65, were, in many cases, survivors of the Tartarian collapse, children whose memories of a different world, a world of free energy and advanced technology, needed to be suppressed? Consider the sheer scale. Children, often too young to fully articulate their pasts, were separated from any remaining family, given new identities, and integrated into a society that was quickly being reshaped. They would be taught a new history, one that conveniently omitted any mention of a grand, preceding civilization. This isn't just about controlling information. It's about controlling the very memory of a generation, effectively erasing their past and fabricating a new one. It's a truly chilling thought, isn't it? To think that our ancestors might have been unwitting participants in such a grand deception, their true heritage stolen from them. And as for the physical remnants of this lost world, many of them, according to Tartarian proponents, were repurposed and presented to the unsuspecting public as temporary marvels. This brings us back to the world's fairs. We touched on this before, but let's really dig into it. Think of the grandeur of the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, the White City, or the 1904 Louisiana Purchase Exposition in St. Louis. These were monumental undertakings, featuring incredibly elaborate, massive structures built in classical styles. Domes, spires, intricate facades, all eerily similar to the alleged Tartarian architecture we've discussed. The official story? They were built in record time, often in just a few years, using newly developed techniques and materials like, quote, 67, a mixture of plaster of Paris, cement, and jute fibres. And then, almost immediately after the fairs closed, they were systematically demolished, often burned down. The explanation given is that they were always intended to be temporary, built for show and not meant to last. But does that really make sense? Look at the photographs. These weren't flimsy structures. Many appear to be solid, permanent buildings, constructed with a level of artistry and engineering that would take decades, not months, to achieve. Think about the sheer volume of resources, the manpower, the architectural genius required to erect such magnificent structures, only to dismantle them a few months later. It seems incredibly wasteful, almost illogical, especially for a burgeoning industrial society. Proponents argue these weren't built for the fairs. They were unveiled at the fairs. They were existing Tartarian structures, perhaps partially salvaged from the mud flood, cleaned up, and then presented as temporary exhibits to showcase the supposed ingenuity of the host nation. It was a brilliant sleight of hand. Display the evidence of a lost civilization, marvel at its complexity, attribute it to your own genius, and then destroy it before anyone can investigate too closely or question its true origins. Why destroy them? To prevent reverse engineering of their free energy technology, to maintain the narrative that humanity was still slowly progressing, not recovering from a monumental setback, to ensure that the new energy paradigm based on scarcity and control could take root without competition. Imagine the collective awe, the wonder, the sense of progress these fairs instilled in the public. It was a powerful tool of psychological manipulation, cementing the idea that humanity was on an upward trajectory, conveniently forgetting the advanced civilization that preceded it. We see this pattern globally. World's fairs in Paris, London, Philadelphia, all showcasing incredible architecture, much of which then vanished. It's almost as if the new global elites were systematically clearing the board, removing the physical reminders of Tartaria, while simultaneously rewriting the history books and re-educating the populace. The implications here are staggering, aren't they? If this theory holds even a shred of truth, it means that our understanding of history, of technology, of human potential has been fundamentally skewed. It suggests a deliberate, organized effort on a global scale, spanning generations, to control not just resources, but information, memory, and ultimately our perception of reality. The orchestrators, according to the theory, were the burgeoning empires and banking cartels of the 19th century, those who stood to gain immense power and wealth from a world dependent on finite resources and centralized energy systems. They needed to create a new narrative, a new civilization built on their terms, and Tartaria, with its free energy and advanced understanding of the world, was simply in the way. This isn't just about a forgotten map entry. It's about the very foundation of our modern world. It challenges the linearity of progress, the narratives we've been taught about industrial revolutions and technological innovation. It forces us to ask, what else have we been told that isn't true? What other secrets are buried beneath the layers of official history? The human cost of such a cover-up is immense. Not just the physical destruction and loss of life, but the psychological impact of living in a fabricated reality. The loss of a true heritage, the suppression of innate human potential, the redirection of innovation towards systems of control rather than liberation. So, as we piece together these fragments, the unexplained architecture, the buried cities, the phantom empire, the convenient, quote, Tampere 68, the unsettling tales of, quote, 69. We're left with a profound question. Is our current reality truly the result of a natural linear progression? Or is it a carefully constructed stage built upon the ashes of a forgotten golden age? The more you look, the more you question, the more you start to wonder if the greatest historical cover-up ever isn't just a theory, but a chilling possibility whispering from the very stones beneath our feet. What do you think? Are these just elaborate coincidences, or are we truly staring at the echoes of a lost world? Okay, so we've journeyed through vanishing maps, monumental architecture, the curious case of the mud flood, the enigma of star forts, the tantalizing whisper of free energy, and the unsettling implications of the world's fairs and orphan trains. Each piece of the puzzle, on its own, might be dismissed as a historical quirk or a forgotten detail. But when you start to connect these dots, a much larger, darker picture begins to emerge, right? Think about it for a second. If even a fraction of what Tartaria proponents claim is true, if there was a global, advanced civilization systematically scrubbed from our collective memory, then we're talking about a level of coordinated deception that truly boggles the mind. It's not just a footnote in a history book, it's the entire book being rewritten. This brings us to perhaps the most chilling question of all, the one that hangs heavy in the air, echoing through every forgotten street and buried foundation. Who? Who had the power, the resources, the sheer audacity, and the coordinated global reach to pull off such a monumental cover-up? And why? Mainstream history offers its neat, tidy explanations for each anomaly. Maps changed due to evolving geopolitical boundaries. Buildings were just grand examples of 19th century ambition. Buried basements, simple settling, or street-level raising over time. Star forts, a common defensive design. Free energy, pure fantasy, orphan trains, a humanitarian effort. Each explanation, individually, sounds plausible enough. But when you stack them up, when you see the pattern stretching across continents and decades, when you consider the convenient timing of these, quote 70, coinciding with the disappearance of Tartary from our atlases, a different narrative starts to scream for attention. Proponents of the Tartarian theory don't mince words. They argue that this wasn't a series of unrelated events or innocent coincidences. This was a deliberate, meticulously planned and ruthlessly executed historical reset, orchestrated by a powerful emerging global elite. We're talking about a coalition of rising empires, the nascent United States, the expanding Russian Empire, the ever-dominant British Empire, possibly working hand in hand with powerful banking cartels and secret societies. Imagine a world where the old order, represented by a benevolent, technologically advanced Tartarian civilization, was seen as an impediment to a new vision of control. A vision built on scarcity, hierarchy, and resource-dependent economies. A world where energy had to be bought, not freely accessed. Where knowledge had to be controlled, not widely shared. This is where the just quote 71 theory takes on an even more sinister hue. Was it truly just a natural cataclysm? Or was it something far more complex, a disaster perhaps exploited, or even facilitated to serve a specific agenda? Consider the timing. Many of these mud flood anomalies, these buried first floors, seem to concentrate around the mid to late 19th century. If a global cataclysm did occur, whether natural, a massive comet impact, a series of volcanic eruptions, a sudden polar shift leading to widespread liquefaction, or even a biblical-scale deluge, or something more, engineered, it would have plunged the world into chaos. Infrastructure would be crippled, communication lines severed, populations displaced, records lost. Think about that for a second. If you were an emerging power, eager to establish a new world order, to rewrite history in your favour, what better opportunity than the aftermath of a global disaster? When the old guard is gone, when the survivors are disoriented, when the physical landscape itself has been altered beyond recognition, that's your chance. You swoop in, you quote 72, rebuild, and in doing so, you control the narrative. You become the saviour, the architect of the new world, while simultaneously erasing all traces of the old. They argue that the Yas quote 73 wasn't just a natural event, it was the perfect cover. It provided the physical means to bury the evidence, literally, to obscure the true age and origin of the grand Tartarian structures, to justify the rebuilding efforts that were, in reality, a rebranding and repurposing of existing infrastructure. The scale of this operation, if true, is mind-boggling. It suggests a level of coordinated effort across continents that challenges our understanding of 19th century logistics and communication. But proponents point to the rapid rise of telegraph networks, the consolidation of financial power, and the burgeoning imperial ambitions of several nations as the fertile ground for such a conspiracy to take root. They argue that the emerging global elite had both the motive, control over resources, energy, and human potential, and the means, financial, military, and informational, to execute this plan. And what about the why in more detail? Beyond simple power and wealth, there's the profound implication of Tartarian technology. If free energy was widely available, if a civilization could thrive without the need for fossil fuels or centralized power grids, imagine the threat that posed to the industrializing nations and the burgeoning oil and coal barons. The suppression of free energy wasn't just about control, it was about creating a system of dependence. A system where every light switch, every engine, every comfort required a transaction, a payment, a submission to the very powers that sought to control. So, the grand, ornate buildings, once symbols of a harmonious, abundant civilization, were repurposed. Their true function as energy conduits was either destroyed or hidden. Their advanced construction techniques were attributed to primitive methods. The beautiful, intricate designs, once a reflection of a sophisticated culture, were dismissed as mere aesthetic flourishes. And then there's the intellectual component of the cover-up. It wasn't enough to bury buildings and re-educate children. They had to rewrite the books. They had to control the flow of information. This meant controlling academia, shaping the curriculum, funding research that supported the new narrative, and marginalizing anyone who dared to question it. Controlling the press, disseminating the approved history, creating new heroes and villains, and framing the past in a way that justified the present. Destroying dissenting records, libraries mysteriously burning, archives lost or misplaced, historical documents reinterpreted or simply vanishing. Think about the sheer volume of information that would need to be altered or suppressed. It's a monumental task, but not an impossible one, especially in an era before widespread digital records. Imagine the painstaking effort to systematically remove, quote, 78 from maps, to reassign architectural marvels, to invent new historical figures and events to fill the void, and the victims, not just the Tartarian people themselves, but all of us. We, the inheritors of this manufactured history, are living under a veil, unaware of our true potential, disconnected from a past that might offer solutions to many of our current global crises. We've been taught to believe in a linear progression of history, from primitive to advanced, always moving forward. But what if that progression was deliberately interrupted? What if humanity experienced a regression, a deliberate setback to serve the interests of a select few? This isn't just about a lost empire, it's about a lost legacy, a legacy of advanced technology, sustainable living, and perhaps a deeper understanding of our place in the cosmos. Proponents argue that the suppression of Tartarian knowledge wasn't just about power, it was about preventing humanity from reaching its true, unbounded potential. To keep us tethered to a system of scarcity and control, rather than allowing us to tap into the abundance that was once our birthright. The lingering questions are immense, aren't they? If this theory holds water, then the very foundations of our understanding of history, technology, and human civilization are built on sand. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable possibility that the official story is just that, a story. A carefully constructed narrative designed to keep us from asking too many questions, from looking too closely at the grand, ornate buildings that stand as silent testaments to a forgotten age. So, where do we go from here? Do we dismiss it all as the ramblings of fringe theorists? Or do we, as curious explorers of truth, dare to keep digging? To keep looking at those old maps, those majestic structures, those curious anomalies, and ask, what else have they hidden? What else don't they want us to know? Because if the Erasure of Tartaria is the greatest historical cover-up ever, then the implications for our present and our future are simply staggering. It means we're not just looking for a lost civilization, we're looking for ourselves. We're looking for the truth of humanity's past, and by extension, its true potential. And that, my friends, is a journey worth taking. All right, so we've peeled back layers of mystery, from vanishing maps to buried buildings, from star forts to the spectre of free energy. We've seen how the world's fairs might have been a grand illusion, presenting magnificent structures as temporary marvels, only to have them quietly dismantled, their true purpose and origins obscured. We've even touched upon the chilling possibility of orphan trains as a tool for social engineering, a systematic re-education of a population stripped of its heritage. Each revelation, each anomaly has chipped away at the solid edifice of accepted history, leaving us with more questions than answers. It's a lot to take in, isn't it? The sheer audacity of these claims, the subtle threads connecting seemingly disparate historical oddities. It can feel overwhelming, like trying to grasp smoke. My own mind, I admit, has wrestled with the implications, the uncomfortable feeling that perhaps the world we inhabit isn't quite what we've been told. But now, we arrive at perhaps the most unsettling question of all. If Tartaria was real, a sprawling, advanced civilization stretching across continents, and its erasure so meticulously orchestrated, who was behind it? And more importantly, why? What could possibly motivate such a colossal global deception? A historical cover-up of this magnitude that would span generations and impact every facet of human life? It's a question that demands not just answers, but a re-evaluation of everything we thought we knew about power, progress, and the very nature of our reality. Think about that for a second. We're talking about rewriting the very foundations of human history, not just tweaking a few dates or reinterpreting an ancient text, but fundamentally altering the narrative of human evolution. We're talking about obscuring an entire civilization, a culture that, by all accounts, was far more advanced and harmonious than the one we've been taught, emerged from the ashes of the Dark Ages. And critically, we're talking about suppressing technologies that could have changed the course of our world, offering solutions to problems we still grapple with today. This isn't just about updating a few maps or correcting minor historical inaccuracies. This is about a complete historical reset, a wholesale fabrication designed to steer humanity onto a predetermined path. The scale of such an undertaking is almost inconceivable, demanding a level of coordination and foresight that stretches the imagination. The proponents of the Tartarian theory point their fingers at what they call the man and quote 80 of the 19th century. Picture this. The world is in flux, a chaotic crucible of change. Old empires like the Ottoman and Qing are waning, their power eroding, while new ones are rising with an insatiable hunger for expansion. Industrialization is taking hold, transforming landscapes and societies at an unprecedented pace, creating vast wealth for some and profound upheaval for many others. We're talking about powerful banking families, their tentacles reaching into every corner of the global economy, financing wars and industries alike. We're talking about nascent industrial magnates, the Carnegies and Rockefellers of their time, consolidating monopolies over essential resources and infrastructure. We're talking about influential secret societies operating in the shadows, their networks of influence permeating political and social structures. And we're talking about the burgeoning imperial powers. Think the British Empire at its zenith, the rapidly expanding United States, the vast and enigmatic Russian Empire, all consolidating power and influence, carving up the world into spheres of control. These weren't disparate groups operating in isolation. They were interconnected, often through intricate webs of finance, trade agreements, dynastic marriages, and shared geopolitical ambitions. They moved in the same exclusive circles, their visions for the future of the world often aligning in ways that benefited their collective power. Here's the thing. If Tartaria existed as this highly advanced, unified global civilization, what were its defining characteristics? Abundant, free energy, for one, harnessed from the atmosphere itself, distributed without cost. Imagine a world where the hum of energy was a natural part of life, not a metered commodity. a harmonious relationship with the planet perhaps, where architecture integrated seamlessly with nature and human endeavours respected ecological balance. A different understanding of history, science, and human potential, one that acknowledged cycles of creation and destruction, one that embraced a more holistic, interconnected view of the universe. This wasn't a world driven by scarcity or competition, but by cooperation and shared prosperity. Now, imagine you're one of these emerging elites, a visionary perhaps, but one consumed by a desire for absolute dominion, looking to establish a new world order built on predictable hierarchies and controlled resources. What's the biggest, most insurmountable obstacle to absolute control? Freedom. Unfettered, unburdened freedom. And what enables freedom more than anything else? Abundant, decentralized energy. The ability to power your home, your transportation, your industry, without needing to pay a fee, without relying on a centralized grid, without being beholden to any corporate or governmental entity. That, my friends, is true liberation. This is where the motive truly crystallizes, solidifying into a chillingly logical, albeit terrifying explanation. The narrative goes that Tartaria's free energy technology, the very etheric energy harnessed by those magnificent buildings, the spires and domes acting as atmospheric energy collectors, drawing power from the ambient energy field of the Earth, posed an existential threat to the agenda of the controllers. Why? Because free energy dismantles the entire economic model built on scarcity, resource control, and debt. It's not just a technological advancement, it's a paradigm shift that would make their carefully constructed system obsolete. The very thought of such a technology thriving openly would have sent shivers down their spines, threatening to unravel generations of strategic planning. Think about it. If energy is free and abundant, what happens to the monolithic oil companies, the powerful coal barons, the burgeoning utility monopolies that were just starting to flex their muscles in the 19th century? What happens to the global financial system that thrives on loans for infrastructure projects, for fuel extraction, for power plant construction, for the very distribution of energy? It collapses. Overnight, the ability to charge for energy, to control its distribution, to make nations and individuals dependent on a centralized grid. This is a cornerstone of control. It's the ultimate leverage, a hidden tax on every aspect of modern life. Without it, their entire apparatus of power would crumble like a house of cards. The sheer terror of losing such fundamental control, of seeing their carefully accumulated wealth and influence rendered meaningless, would have been a powerful, all-consuming motivator. So, the res quotation becomes terrifyingly clear. Control. Control over resources, control over industry, control over the very lives of the population, down to the most basic needs. The suppression of Tartarian free energy wasn't just about hiding a technology. It was about laying the groundwork for a new paradigm where energy was a commodity, controlled and priced, creating a system of dependency that we still live under today. We are, in essence, paying for something that could be free, a perpetual tax on existence, all because a powerful few decided it was in their best interest to keep us dependent. The heavy weight of that realization, the thought that our daily struggles are in part a consequence of this historical manipulation, is truly unsettling. But it wasn't just about energy. The control extended to the narrative itself, to the very story of humanity. If Tartaria represented a peak of human civilization, a golden age that predated our current understanding of history, then its existence would challenge the entire, quote 82, that the emerging elites were crafting. You know the one, humanity slowly crawling out of the caves, through the superstitious dark ages, gradually inventing and advancing, culminating in their industrial age and their scientific discoveries. This narrative conveniently places them at the pinnacle of human achievement, legitimizing their power and their vision for the future. What if that narrative is a carefully constructed lie? What if we didn't slowly progress to this level of sophistication, but rather recovered from a far greater one, and that recovery was deliberately stunted and misdirected? The idea of a historical reset isn't just about erasing a name on a map or blurring a few dates. It's about erasing an entire paradigm of human existence, a memory of what was truly possible, what was truly lost. It's about severing our connection to a past that could inspire a different, freer future, ensuring that we never look back to question the path we're on. The thought that our collective memory has been so thoroughly manipulated, that our very perception of human potential has been artificially limited, is perhaps the most profound implication of all. This is where the who gets even more unsettling, because the methods employed were insidious and pervasive. How do you rewrite history on a global scale? You control the institutions, you influence education, crafting curricula that reinforce the new narrative, eradicating any mention of the old. You fund historians, academics, and archaeologists who will write the new story, interpreting existing evidence through a pre-approved lens, or simply ignoring what doesn't fit. You establish museums that tell your story, showcasing artifacts in a way that supports the fabricated timeline, and critically, you control the flow of information, ensuring that dissenting voices are silenced, marginalized, or simply never heard. This isn't a quick fix, it's a multi-generational project, a slow, steady drip of engineered reality. Imagine the late 19th century. Photography is emerging, a powerful new medium, perceived as objective truth. Newspapers are becoming widespread, shaping public opinion on an unprecedented scale. These are powerful tools, perfect for a grand deception. If you're orchestrating a cover-up, you use them. You publish new maps, conveniently omitting entire regions or renaming them. You print new textbooks, systematically revising historical events. You photograph the new structures at world's fairs, these breathtaking palaces of glass and steel, attributing them to contemporary architects, then quietly dismantle them after the fair concludes, leaving behind only the photographic, quote 86, of their fleeting existence, proof that we built them, not some forgotten civilization. It's a masterful sleight of hand on a global stage, a magician's trick played on an entire population where the grand illusion is accepted as reality. And those, quote 87, we talked about, if a global cataclysm like the quote 88 did indeed decimate the Tartarian population, leaving behind countless children, confused and vulnerable amidst the ruins of their world, what better way to ensure the new narrative takes root than to take those children, strip them of their original identities and re-educate them, to instill in them a new history, a new language, a new way of life, erasing any memory of the advanced world they might have come from. Imagine the trauma, the disorientation, the systematic indoctrination. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? The ultimate form of social engineering, creating a blank slate for the New World Order, ensuring that the last vestiges of the old world are not only silenced but actively overwritten. The echoes of their forgotten past, the potential memories of a free and abundant world, would be systematically drowned out by the manufactured history of their new masters. The implications are profound. If this theory holds even a shred of truth, it means that humanity has been living under a fabricated reality for well over a century. We've been disconnected from our true heritage, from technologies that could have solved our energy crises, from a past that might offer a blueprint for a more harmonious existence. We've been led to believe in a linear upward progression, when perhaps we were deliberately steered off a different, more advanced path, a path that was inconvenient for those who sought to control us. The feeling of being robbed of a birthright, of a richer, more powerful history, is almost unbearable. The orchestrators, the proponents argue, understood that knowledge is power, and the ultimate power is the power to define reality itself. By controlling history, by controlling energy, by controlling information, they could control the future. They could ensure that humanity remained dependent, compliant, and unaware of its true potential. They could mold our collective consciousness, shaping our aspirations and limiting our dreams to fit within the confines of their engineered world. This isn't just about wealth or political power. It's about the very soul of humanity. It's a heavy concept, I know. It forces us to question everything we thought we knew about our past, about progress, about the very nature of civilization. It demands a level of critical thinking and open-mindedness that challenges our deepest assumptions. Could it be that the grand narratives we've been taught, the stories of our origins and our journey, are nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion, designed to keep us from realizing what was truly lost? The internal struggle to reconcile this possibility with the comfortable certainties of mainstream history is, for me, a constant companion on this journey. What do you think? Does the idea of a global elite orchestrating such a monumental cover-up, driven by a thirst for absolute control over energy and history, resonate with the evidence we've explored? Or is it too far-fetched, too convenient an explanation for anomalies that mainstream history struggles to fully explain? This is where the detective work truly begins, my friends, where we weigh the possibilities, examine the evidence with fresh eyes, and dare to ask the most challenging question of all: what if? All right, you've seen the disappearing maps, the buried buildings, the geometric star forts, the Quote 89, theories, the repurposed World's Fair marvels, and even the chilling possibility of Quote 90 as a means of societal reset. Your mind is probably reeling with the sheer audacity of it all, right? Mine certainly is. We've peeled back so many layers of this historical onion, and with each one the question gets louder, more insistent. Who could orchestrate such a monumental deception, and why? This, my friends, is where the narrative shifts from observation to outright speculation, from anomaly to motive. Because if Tartaria was real, if it was indeed a global advanced civilization systematically wiped from our collective memory, then the Quote 91 and the Quote 92 aren't just footnotes. They're the very foundation of the world we inhabit today. So let's dive headfirst into the murky waters of power, control, and the alleged architects of our modern reality. The orchestrators, unmasking the alleged perpetrators. Think about the scale of this purported cover-up. We're talking about the coordinated erasure of a global empire, the destruction or repurposing of its infrastructure, the rewriting of history books, the re-education of populations, and the suppression of advanced technology. This isn't something a handful of individuals could pull off in a backroom somewhere. This would require immense coordinated power, resources, and a shared agenda. Proponents of the Tartarian theory point their fingers squarely at the rising global elites of the 19th century. Who were these players? First, you have the emerging global empires. We're talking about the British Empire expanding its dominion across continents, the burgeoning United States, with its manifest destiny pushing westward, a rapidly expanding Russian Empire, and the rising powers of Prussia, soon to be Germany. These entities weren't just vying for territory, they were competing for control over resources, trade routes, and influence. A unified, powerful Tartarian presence, especially one that offered a different paradigm of societal organization and energy, would have been a direct threat to their ambitions. Then there are the damn financial powers. The 19th century was the era of immense consolidation of wealth and the rise of powerful banking cartels. Families like the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Morgans. These groups were not just loaning money, they were investing in industries, controlling resources, and influencing governments. Their power lay in scarcity, in the control of energy, coal, oil, and in the creation of debt. Imagine a world where energy is free, abundant, and accessible to everyone. What happens to the entire financial system built on resource control and debt? It collapses. This, proponents argue, was perhaps the single most potent motive. And let's not forget the more shadowy elements. Many theories also point to the influence of secret societies and elite organizations. Prevalent during this period, groups like the Freemasons, the Illuminati, and various other brotherhoods. While mainstream history often downplays their direct impact, Tartarian theorists suggest these groups provided the ideological framework and the clandestine networks necessary to coordinate such a vast undertaking. They were, according to this view, the intellectual architects and logistical facilitators, embedding their symbols and philosophies into the very fabric of the new world they were building. They weren't necessarily the sole perpetrators, but rather key players in a larger coordinated effort. The common thread among these groups, a desire for centralized hierarchical power. A world operating on principles of free energy and abundant resources, as Tartaria is imagined to have done, is inherently decentralized. It empowers the individual and the local community, making top-down control incredibly difficult, if not impossible. The Bastier, quote 95, motives for the erasure. So with these powerful players in mind, let's connect the dots to their ultimate motivations. Why go through such extraordinary lengths to erase an entire civilization? 1. Control over energy, the ultimate prize. This is by far the most compelling why for many Tartarian researchers. If Tartaria possessed and utilized free energy technology, harnessing atmospheric electricity, resonance, or other etheric sources, it represented an existential threat to the emerging industrial and financial order. The entire global economy, as it was being shaped in the 19th century, was to be built upon the extraction, control, and sale of finite resources: coal, oil, gas. Imagine a world where energy is as free as the air we breathe. No oil barons, no utility bills, no petrodollars, no energy monopolies. The power structure would be inverted overnight. Erasing Tartaria meant erasing the concept of free energy, allowing for the implementation of a new, controllable energy paradigm. 2. Control over information and history, shaping reality. A population that understands its true past, a past of advanced technology, global unity, and harmonious existence, is a dangerous population to those seeking absolute control. If humanity once lived in such a state, it provides a blueprint, a reference point for what's possible. Erasing Tartaria wasn't just about hiding buildings, it was about hiding a paradigm. By rewriting history, by teaching us that our ancestors were primitive, that progress is a slow, linear march from caves to combustion engines, they effectively limit our collective imagination and our aspirations. We are taught to accept scarcity, competition, and hierarchy as natural, inevitable forces rather than engineered constructs. 3. Control over resources, the foundation of wealth. Beyond energy, the control of all natural resources, minerals, land, water, is fundamental to wealth and power. A decentralized, advanced civilization might have had different methods of resource management, perhaps even transmuting elements or creating materials with technologies we can barely fathom today. By eliminating Tartaria, the emerging elite could then claim ownership and control over vast territories and their underlying resources, establishing this scarcity model that drives our current economic system. 4. Social engineering and reshaping society. Remember the orphan trains. They suddenly make a chilling kind of sense in this context. If a global cataclysm, the mud flood, had indeed occurred, decimating populations and disrupting existing social structures, it would have left countless survivors, especially children, displaced and vulnerable. What better way to cement a new historical narrative than to re-educate these survivors, to strip them of their memory of the old world and integrate them into the new, compliant workforce needed for the industrial age? It's a terrifying thought, erasing not just buildings and maps, but the very memories of a generation. 5. Fear of the unknown and consolidation of power. It's also possible that the emerging elite genuinely feared aspects of Tartarian technology or its societal structure. Or perhaps more simply, they saw an unprecedented opportunity. A global cataclysm creates chaos, and chaos is often the breeding ground for new power structures. By stepping into the void, offering Xi'an $100, rebuilding or claiming existing structures, and establishing a new narrative, they could consolidate power on a scale never before seen. The cataclysm revisited, natural disaster or engineered event. This brings us back to the Genju $10 realm. Was it a purely natural event, a comet impact, a series of supervolcano eruptions, massive seismic activity, or even a reinterpretation of a biblical-scale flood that simply provided the opportune moment for the reset? Or, as some of the more radical proponents suggest, was it partially engineered? The prevailing theory among Tartarian researchers leans towards a significant natural cataclysm, perhaps a series of events that decimated the existing Tartarian civilization. This event would have caused widespread destruction, buried cities in layers of mud and sediment, and thrown the world into chaos. It's during this chaotic period, they argue, that the emerging elite seized their chance. While the world was reeling, while populations were displaced and disoriented, the reset could begin in earnest. The existing structures, partially buried but still magnificent, could be repurposed. The technology could be suppressed. The history could be rewritten. The idea of an engineered cataclysm is a darker, more extreme speculation. It suggests a level of technological capability, geoengineering, advanced weaponry, that is almost as mind-blowing as Tartarian free energy itself. While less widely accepted, it's a possibility that underscores the ruthlessness attributed to the alleged orchestrators. For our purposes, it's enough to consider that a massive world-altering event occurred, whether natural or manipulated, which served as the perfect smokescreen for the grand historical reset. Tartarian technology, beyond free energy. We've touched on free energy, but what other advancements might Tartaria have possessed that warranted such a thorough erasure? Advanced materials and construction techniques. How else could they build those massive, ornate, globally uniform structures with such speed and precision? Proponents suggest lost knowledge of materials science, perhaps involving forms of concrete or stone that could be rapidly cast or grown, or techniques leveraging acoustics and resonance to effortlessly move massive blocks. Imagine constructing a cathedral in months, not centuries, and with minimal labour. Harmonic architecture and resonance. The domes, spires, and intricate designs of these buildings weren't just aesthetic, they were functional. They were designed to resonate with the Earth's natural frequencies, to draw in atmospheric energy, and perhaps even to promote healing and well-being. The very environment was engineered for abundance and vitality. Global communication and transportation. If they had free energy, what about other technologies? Were there global communication networks that didn't rely on wires? Advanced forms of transportation that could traverse continents and oceans with ease, making the world a truly connected place? The destruction and suppression of this technology weren't just about controlling energy. It was about controlling humanity's potential. It was about ensuring that the New World Order would develop along a specific, controlled technological path, one that required centralized infrastructure, resource extraction, and dependence. The boss, quote 103, emerges. So, here's the chilling culmination of the Tartarian theory. The cataclysm hits. Chaos reigns. The emerging global elite, with their shared agenda of centralized power and resource control, steps in. They exploit the aftermath, claiming the existing grand structures as their own, demolishing others, often under the guise of world's fairs, and introducing new, quote 104, technologies, fossil fuels, early electricity grids, as the cutting edge. They rewrite history, re-educate the survivors, and establish a new narrative of human progress. A narrative that conveniently omits a global advanced civilization that once thrived on different principles. What we call, quote 105. Then, according to this theory, isn't a continuous organic evolution, but a carefully constructed narrative, a deliberate redirection of humanity's path. We are living in a reality built upon a colossal lie, a fabricated past designed to keep us dependent, compliant, and unaware of our true heritage and potential. It's a lot to chew on, isn't it? It challenges everything we thought we knew about history, technology, and power. But what if it's true? What if the greatest cover-up isn't just about what happened, but about who we are and what we could be? This isn't just about uncovering a forgotten empire. It's about reclaiming a suppressed truth, and that, my friends, is a journey we're only just beginning. All right, So we've journeyed through the vanishing empire on old maps, marvelled at the impossible architecture scattered across the globe, dug into the unsettling implications of the mud flood, and stared up at those enigmatic star forts. We've even considered the mind-bending possibility of free energy powering an ancient world, and how world's fairs might have been elaborate stage sets for a grand deception. Then, the chilling idea that the Quote 106 weren't just charity, but a systematic re-education program designed to erase memory. It's a lot to take in, isn't it? Your head must be spinning, questioning everything you thought you knew about history. And that, my friends, is exactly where we need to be. Because now, we arrive at the precipice of the biggest questions of all. Who orchestrated this monumental cover-up, and why? What could possibly drive such an audacious global act of historical erasure? And perhaps most profoundly, what does it mean for us for humanity's true potential if we've been living a lie for centuries? Let's be honest. When you start talking about a global conspiracy to erase an entire civilization, most people immediately jump to the quote 100th Brigade. But what if, just for a moment, we set aside our ingrained skepticism and follow the threads of evidence? If the proponents of Tartaria are even partially right, then the quote 100th behind this operation would have to be an entity or a collective of entities with immense power, resources, and a truly global reach. Think about the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a period of explosive industrial growth, colonial expansion, and the consolidation of power. Who were the major players emerging on the world stage? We're talking about the burgeoning empires, the British, the American, the Russian. We're talking about the rise of massive industrial cartels, the titans of finance, the families who would literally shape the modern world's economy, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Morgans. These were individuals and groups accumulating unprecedented wealth and influence, often through industries that relied on scarcity and control: oil, coal, centralized electricity, banking. Now, consider the Tartarian narrative. If a global advanced civilization existed, one that understood the natural laws of the universe, harnessed abundant, clean, quote 109, energy, and lived in harmony with the planet, what would that mean for these emerging power structures? Here's the thing: free energy, by its very definition, undermines the entire economic model built on scarcity. If energy is abundant and virtually free, there's no need to drill for oil, mine for coal, or build massive centralized power grids that can be monopolized and metered. There's no need for an endless cycle of debt and consumption driven by resource scarcity. That, my friends, is a direct threat to anyone whose power, wealth, and control are derived from owning and distributing finite resources. So, the quote 110 Dios begins to crystallize, doesn't it? The motive, according to Tartarian proponents, is absolute control. Control over energy, control over resources, control over information, and, crucially, control over the very narrative of human progress. Imagine a world where energy is limitless and accessible to all. What would that do to the power dynamics? Poverty as we know it would cease to exist. Innovation would explode. Humanity could focus on higher pursuits, on art, science, exploration, true global cooperation. This vision, while beautiful, is utterly antithetical to a system that thrives on division, competition, and the constant struggle for resources. If Tartaria represented a paradigm of abundance and decentralized power, its erasure would be a necessary precursor to establishing a new world order based on scarcity, centralized control, and a hierarchical structure where a select few dictate the terms of existence for the many. They argue that by fabricating a linear struggle-filled history, from rudimentary caves to steam engines, then to fossil fuels, the emerging elite could legitimize their own rise to power. They could present themselves as the bringers of, quote, the architects of modernity, rather than the suppressors of a superior past. Think about it. If humanity knew it had once lived in a world of advanced, clean technology and global harmony, would it tolerate being told that progress means pollution, war, and economic servitude? No way. The memory of Tartaria and its underlying technological and philosophical principles would be a constant, dangerous reminder of what was lost and what could be reclaimed. It would be a blueprint for a different, more equitable future, one that the aspiring global elite simply could not allow. This brings us back to the nature of the cataclysm itself. We've touched on the sentence or quote 112, the idea of a global event that buried the lower levels of countless buildings worldwide. Was this just an unfortunate natural disaster, a massive seismic shift, or a sudden, widespread liquefaction event that opportunistically provided the perfect cover for the reset? Or, and this is where it gets truly unsettling, was it something engineered? Proponents point to the sheer scale and uniformity of the buried structures. They ask, could a natural event be that precise, that widespread, and happen with such convenient timing for a global power shift? Some even speculate about advanced weaponry, perhaps even from the Tartarian civilization itself, misused or turned against it, triggering a planetary upheaval. Others suggest that the quote 113 eon wasn't just dirt, but a consequence of a catastrophic energy discharge, perhaps from a global free energy grid collapsing or being attacked. Whatever its true nature, the cataclysm, whether natural or engineered, created a blank slate. It was the perfect storm, or perhaps the perfectly created storm, for the historical reset to occur. Imagine the chaos, the confusion, the loss of life and infrastructure. In the aftermath, with populations decimated and survivors disoriented, it would be relatively easy for an organized, powerful group to step in, rewrite the narrative, and rebuild the world in their own image. This is where the orphan trains and the World's Fairs come into play again, but with a darker edge. The children, survivors of the cataclysm, were stripped of their heritage, their language, their memories, and integrated into the new, manufactured reality. The grand Tartarian buildings, partially buried, were either demolished, or, if too magnificent to destroy, they were repurposed. Those World's Fair structures, many proponents argue they weren't built from scratch in a few months, but were existing Tartarian marvels cleaned up, superficially embellished, presented as temporary, quote, 15th by the new masters, only to be dismantled or destroyed shortly after, removing the evidence. Think about the psychological impact of all this. If this theory holds water, then humanity has been living in a curated reality for at least a century and a half. Our understanding of science, technology, history, and even our own potential has been deliberately limited. We've been taught to believe in a linear progression from primitive to advanced, constantly striving for new technologies that, in this view, are often just rediscovered, re-engineered, and then monopolized versions of what Tartaria already possessed. What does it mean for S? It means that our true potential, our collective human genius, has been systematically suppressed. We could be living in a world of abundance, clean energy, harmony, and advanced understanding of the universe. Instead, we are locked into a system of scarcity, pollution, conflict, and a constant struggle for basic necessities, all while being told this is progress. This isn't just about old maps and fancy buildings, folks. This is about the very fabric of our reality. It's about challenging the fundamental assumptions we hold about who we are, where we come from, and where we're going. If the Tartarian narrative is true, even in part it means that humanity has been robbed of its true heritage, its advanced technologies, and a path towards a far more enlightened and harmonious existence. The ultimate unresolved mystery, then, isn't just who did it or why, but what the full truth of humanity's past implies for our future. Can we, by questioning the accepted narrative, begin to reclaim that lost potential? Can we start to see beyond the fabricated reality and rebuild a world based on the principles that Tartaria supposedly embodied? These questions hang in the air, heavy with the weight of centuries of hidden history, inviting us to look closer, to dig deeper, and to never stop asking, what if? All right, fellow truth seekers, let's dive even deeper into this rabbit hole, shall we? We've peeled back layers of maps and architectural anomalies, stared into the abyss of the mud flood, and glimpsed the shadowy motives of a potential global elite. But now, we come to the really juicy stuff, the core questions that, if answered, could fundamentally reshape everything you thought you knew. What exactly was Tartarian technology? How did it work? And how, in the name of all that is historical, did a handful of emerging powers manage to coordinate a cover-up so vast, so intricate, that it spanned continents and generations, erasing an entire civilization from our collective memory? Let's start with the tech. You've seen the grand, ornate buildings, right? The colossal columns, the majestic domes, the intricate spires reaching for the sky. Mainstream history tells us these were purely aesthetic, symbols of wealth and power, built with brute force and rudimentary tools. But what if that's just a convenient narrative, a distraction from their true purpose? Proponents of the Tartarian theory argue that these structures were, in fact, advanced technological marvels, designed not just to house people, but to harness energy. We're talking about a form of free, abundant energy, often referred to as atmospheric, etheric, or even resonant energy. Imagine a world where power wasn't generated by burning fossil fuels or splitting atoms, but by tapping into the very fabric of the cosmos, the ubiquitous energy field that surrounds us all. Think about it. Those domes, not just for aesthetics, they claim, they were resonance chambers designed to amplify and collect subtle energies. Those towering spires, often topped with what looked like elaborate antennas or lightning rods. They weren't just decorative finials, they were conduits, drawing in atmospheric electricity or etheric currents from the air itself. The ornate carvings, the geometric patterns, the specific materials used, all part of a sophisticated system, a symphony of form and function designed to interact with natural frequencies. We're talking about an architectural science far beyond our current understanding, a kind of living technology embedded directly into the urban landscape. Picture entire cities functioning as giant power grids, illuminated and sustained by the very air around them. No power lines, no power plants, no pollution. Just clean, boundless energy for everyone. It blows my mind just contemplating the possibilities. This wasn't just about lighting streets. It was about heating homes, powering transportation, perhaps even enabling forms of communication we can barely comprehend today. Imagine a world free from the scarcity of resources, where energy was as free and accessible as the air you breathe. That's the vision of Tartaria that proponents paint, and it's a vision that stands in stark contrast to the centralized, debt-based, resource-dependent model we live under now. Now let's pivot to the cataclysm that allegedly set the stage for this grand erasure, the infamous mud flood. We've seen the evidence. Buildings worldwide with their ground floors inexplicably buried, windows becoming basements, entire architectural styles adapted to a new, higher ground level. The question that hangs heavy in the air is, was this a natural disaster or something far more sinister? The mainstream explanation usually points to localized floods, shifting ground, or simply poor construction over centuries. But the sheer global scale of the buried structures, the uniformity of the phenomenon, pushes back against those easy answers. How could so many disparate cities, across continents, simultaneously experience the exact same type of geological shift? Proponents offer two main theories for the mud flood, and both are equally unsettling. The first suggests a massive global cataclysm, perhaps a comet impact, a series of colossal volcanic eruptions, or even a cyclical cosmic event that periodically reshapes our planet. This event would have unleashed unimaginable amounts of dust, ash, and debris into the atmosphere, which then settled and combined with torrential rains, created a global deluge of mud, burying the lower levels of Tartarian cities. Think about the historical accounts of great floods or deluges in various cultures. Could these be echoes of such an event? The second theory, however, is even more chilling. It proposes that while a natural event might have occurred, it was either engineered or, at the very least, exploited by the emerging global elite. Imagine a world-changing event, whether natural or weaponized, that creates the perfect cover for a systemic reset. A world plunged into chaos, where infrastructure is destroyed, populations are decimated, and the survivors are left vulnerable and disoriented. This isn't just about a flood. It's about a strategic opportunity. Under the guise of rebuilding and recovery, the new powers could then systematically dismantle the remaining Tartarian technology, bury what they couldn't understand or didn't want revealed, and begin to rewrite history. They would literally build on top of the old world, creating a new narrative, a new timeline, and a new reality for the survivors. The mud flood becomes not just a disaster, but the ultimate historical blank slate. This brings us to the most complex and, frankly, most audacious part of the entire Tartarian theory. The intricate details of how this emerging global elite managed to coordinate such a massive multi-generational deception. We're talking about a conspiracy of epic proportions, one that would require incredible foresight, unwavering commitment, and an almost unimaginable level of secrecy. Who are these architects of deception? The theory points to a coalition of powerful forces rising in the 18th and 19th centuries, burgeoning empires like the British, Russian, and later American industrial powers, influential banking families, think Rothschilds and others, and deeply entrenched secret societies like certain factions of Freemasonry or other esoteric orders. These groups, often interconnected and sharing a common ideology of control and centralized power, would have seen the Tartarian model of free energy and abundance as an existential threat to their emerging order. Their motive was clear: absolute control. Control over energy, control over resources, control over information, and ultimately control over humanity itself. A world of free energy means no need for oil barons, no need for power companies, no need for the debt-based financial systems that underpin our current global economy. It's a paradigm shift that they simply couldn't allow. So, how did they pull it off? It wasn't a single event, but a multi-pronged, multi-generational strategy. 1. Information warfare and historical revisionism. This was paramount. They needed to control the narrative. This meant seizing control of publishing houses, universities, historical societies, and academies. Original maps depicting Tartary were systematically removed or altered. Textbooks were rewritten, omitting any mention of this vast civilization. New, quote, 124 were installed to propagate the approved history, dismissing any anomalies as primitive, superstitious, or simply mislabeled. Think about the burning of libraries, the destruction of historical records. Could some of these events have been deliberate purges? 2. Architectural deception. We talked about the world's fairs, remember? These colossal exhibitions, presented as temporary marvels of human ingenuity, are seen by proponents as a brilliant sleight of hand. They argue that many of the grand temporary structures displayed at these fairs were, in fact, existing Tartarian buildings, salvaged and repurposed, perhaps even still functional in terms of energy. They were briefly unveiled to the public, presented as new creations, only to be systematically demolished or mysteriously destroyed by fire afterward. Why? To prevent scrutiny, reverse engineering, and the realization that humanity had already possessed such advanced technology. It was a grand illusion, a controlled reveal followed by an immediate erasure. 3. Cultural erasure and re-education. This is where the orphan trains theory comes into play, a truly chilling aspect of the alleged cover-up. If there were survivors of the mud flood, children especially who might remember the old world, they needed to be assimilated. The orphan trains, which transported tens of thousands of children across America and Canada in the 19th and early 20th centuries, are theorized to have been a systematic method of stripping these children of their identities, their heritage, and their memories. Placed in new families, often in harsh conditions, they were raised in the new, fabricated reality, their past effectively erased. It's a brutal form of cultural genocide designed to sever any lingering connection to Tartaria. 4. Financial and political control. As the New World Order took shape, these elite groups consolidated their power through centralized banking systems, controlling credit and debt. They funded wars, industrial revolutions, and new infrastructural projects, all of which served to erase the old world and establish their dominance. They cultivated a system where every nation became dependent on their financial structures, ensuring compliance and preventing any resurgence of the old free energy paradigm. This wasn't a quick fix. It was a multi-generational project, passed down through secret societies and powerful families. Indoctrination, initiation rituals, and a shared vision of a controlled future would have ensured continuity. The silence, the lack of evidence in mainstream records becomes, in this light, not an absence of proof, but proof of a successful cover-up. So, what are we left with? A profound implication that humanity has been living under a fabricated reality, cut off from its true potential, and a past that offered solutions to many of our modern crises. The erasure of Tartaria, if true, isn't just a historical footnote. It's the foundational lie upon which our entire modern civilization is built. It forces us to ask, what else have they hidden? And what would our world look like today if Tartaria had never been erased? The questions just keep piling up, don't they? And the more we look, the more we realize that the official story might just be the tip of a very, very old and very, very deep iceberg.